Our topic today is on the trigonometric equations. So under trigonometric equations, we are dealing with sine, cosine, and tan. So we are saying sine, cosine, and tan theta can be positive or negative depending on the quadrant within which theta fall. So what are we talking about when we say quadrants? Now the quadrants are determined on a Cartesian diagram. Okay, the x or y plane. So on this Cartesian diagram that we have here down, so on this Cartesian diagram that we have down here, so we are saying in the first, so this one is known as the first quadrant. Then this will be the second quadrant, third quadrant, and fourth quadrant. Okay. So in the first quadrant, the sine, the cos, and the tan are all positive. Okay. Then when you go in the second quadrant, only sine is positive, while the cos and the tan will be negative. Then when you go in the third quadrant, we are saying only tan is positive, while the sine and the cos will be negative. Then when you go in the fourth quadrant, we are saying only cosine or cos is positive, while the sine and the tan will be negative. Okay, so going further there, we are going to say, when you are dealing with a Cartesian diagram, we are saying the Cartesian diagram here, the Cartesian diagram is very useful when solving trig equations. Okay, why? Because a trigonometric equation we usually have two solutions. So this equation can fall in in two quadrants. Okay, but the difference one will come from the from the first quadrant, which is the all positive quadrant. Okay, then to solve equations of the form sine theta is equal to k, which is now we are talking about a trigonometric equation. Sine theta is equal to k, cos theta is equal to k, and tan theta is equal to k. We are saying step number one is saying find the reference angle in the first quadrant. So you're going to find what the angle in this quadrant. What was the angle for this quadrant? Then after you find the angle for this quadrant, you ask yourself now in step number two, you determine in which two quadrants does theta lie. So in which two quadrants does theta lie? So the theta that you're going to find here, you ask yourself, in which quadrant? For instance, if it was in this one was the theta, then they're saying sine theta. So you're going to ask yourself, in which quadrant is sine positive? Then if it is in the second quadrant, you are saying, okay, it is in the second quadrant and first quadrant. Okay. Then after determining the quadrant in which those are lying, then you do the last part, which is find the corresponding angle in the two quadrants. So what was the corresponding angle in the two quadrants that you have identified where the theta lie? From there, now we can look at some few examples. We have two examples that we are going to discuss on pertaining to the trigonometric equations. Okay, so question number one says solve the equation sine theta is equal to 0.766 for 0 degrees is less than or equal to theta, and theta should be less than or equal to 180 degrees. So what it means here is that your answer should be between 0 degrees and 180 degrees. You should never find an answer above 180 degrees. Okay. Then the second one, which is solve the equation tan theta is equal to negative 5.67. Then for 0 degrees is less than theta, and theta it should be less than 360 degrees. Okay. So now, how do you come up with these equations? So if you have a Cartesian plane or the quadrants, okay, so remember that in here all are what? Positive, right? Okay, so here that's where we get the reference what? Angle based on the steps that we looked at. So the first quadrant is where we get the reference angle. Then in the second quadrant, in here where we have what? Sine. Okay, so in here the equation here will be what? Theta will be equal to 180 minus what? The reference angle. 180 minus the reference angle. Then in here the equation will be theta will be equal to the reference angle minus what? So plus 180. Okay, so the reference angle plus what? 180. Then in the last in the last quadrant here, to be theta will be equal to 360 minus the reference what? Angle. Okay, so these are basically what you do. Okay, so now let us answer our question. So for question number 1 there, we are going to say solution. So in this case we are going to say we have sine theta is equal to 0.766. Okay, so in this case let us find our reference angle. So our reference angle here, we are going to say our reference angle here will be is equal to, then you just say sine inverse of what? 0.766. Okay, so basically we are finding the what? The first what? The reference angle which falls in the first quadrant. So our reference angle here will be, so you're going to punch on your calculator what is the sine inverse of this one, which will give us 49.9960. Numbers will continue there. So there, when we round off, our reference angle here will be what? In short, you're going to say our reference angle will be what? 50 degrees. Okay, so then you are going to ask yourself, in which quadrant is sine positive? In which quadrant is sine positive? Okay, so the sine is positive in the what? Second what? Quadrant, and first what? Quadrant. Now for the first quadrant is where we get our reference what? Angle, which is what? 50. Okay, so we are going to say sine is positive in the first and second quadrant. Okay, now for the first first quadrant, we have our reference angle, which is what? 50. So that one we are done with it. Then in the second quadrant, so we're going to say second quadrant. In the second quadrant, you're going to say you just say theta. The formula for the second quadrant, which is theta, is equal to 180 minus what? The reference angle. So what is our reference angle? So you say 180 minus our reference angle, which is what? 50. Okay, so from there you're going to say 180 minus 50, which gives us what? 130 degrees. So these are your possible answers for question number one. So your answers is 130 degrees and what? 50 degrees. For the first quadrant, which is 50, and for the second quadrant, which is what? 130. Okay, for the second question, which we said it is in tan theta is equal to negative 5.6 7. So for this one, first step is let us find our reference what? Angle. So our reference angle here, we are going to say our reference angle will be what? Tan inverse of what? So you are, for in this case, forget about the negative there. Forget about this negative, just write in 5.67. So just leave out the what? The negative here. So the negative will help us to determine in which quadrant we are going to be solving. Okay. So in this case, we are going to have what? Our reference angle to be, if you get your calculator there, you're going to have 79.99 something there. Then this one, when we round off, is the same as what? 8 what? Degrees. Okay. That's what this one will be basically in the first what? Quadrant. So now you're going to ask yourself, in which quadrant is tan negative? In which quadrant is tan what? Negative. So in this case, we're saying tan is negative in what? In second and what? Fourth quadrants. Okay. So in the second and fourth quadrant. So for the second quadrant, here we are going to say, we are going to say theta will be equal to 180 minus what? The reference angle. That's the formula for the second what? Quadrant. So we are going to say theta will be equal to 180 minus what? 80, which gives me our theta to be what? 100 degrees in the what? Second what? Quadrant. Okay. Then in the fourth quadrant, we said it to be theta will be equal to 360 minus what? The reference what? Angle, which gives us our theta to be 360 minus our reference angle, which is what? 80. So therefore our theta here will be what? Will be something like 280 degrees. So these are our possible what? Answers for the two what? Quadrant. So as you can see,